to have that name Zedek as part of their name. It was a formal title. And so literally, Melchizedek means the king of righteousness. Okay, that's what he was named, the king of righteousness, or that was the king name that he took when he was crowned king. But he was also, by his location, the king of Salem. Salem is a English version of shalom, which means peace. He was literally the king of shalom, peace. So his name and his title, his designation was where he was from, literally mean that. He was the king of righteousness, king of peace by his titles, okay? But he was also a priest of the God Most High, or the Most High God, which means he was a priest designated as a priest for God, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the one true God. He was a priest. But he was not a priest according to the law. Why? Law doesn't exist for a few hundred years, like close to 500 years. There is no law. There is no Levites. We're going to be reading about that in a second here. At this time, there are no Levites. Why? Because it's a time of Abraham. Levi is a descendant of Abraham. So there are no priestly lines. There are no laws. There are no anything. Melchizedek was made priest by God himself. Okay? Now this next part is where people kind of jump off the deep end because they look at it in English and they go, oh, that must mean this. It says, without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life. So they look at this and they go, see, he just appears at that moment. That makes him a pre-incarnate Christ. Well, no. Here's why. All this means when you're looking at it, when it was written in the Greek, is we don't know his genealogy. We don't know where he came from. We don't know his family line. We don't know even his nationality. We don't know for sure if he was a Canaanite, if he was a Jebusite, if he was a what. We don't know because we have no other information than this priest of God Most High shows up in the desert and blesses Abraham. So we don't know anything about him. We don't know his father. We don't know his mother. We don't know his genealogy. We don't know the beginning of his days. We don't know when he was born, and we don't know when he died. We have nothing on him. And the next verse then says, resembling the Son of God. Not he was the Son of God, but he resembled it. Meaning again that when we start talking about the priesthood, his priestly line was like that of Melchizedek, not from Levi, not from the law, and not representing the law of God. And he remains a priest forever. So it says then, just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. When Abraham came back from defeating the 5 kings of the north, if you remember that story, the kings came down, conquered the kings of the south, took Lot as a captive and headed off towards the north. Abraham took 318 fighting men from his household, chased them all the way up to what Damascus is now, defeated those kings, got Lot and the other prisoners back, got the plunder from those kings. Abraham would not take the plunder because he said, no man is going to say that he made me, I represent God. No man is going to make me rich. So he didn't take it, but what he had, he brought back and gave a tenth of it to Melchizedek as a priest of God. So that's this exchange. Melchizedek comes out of nowhere. He shows up in the Valley of Salt, which is the Dead Sea Valley, shows up there with bread and wine, offers them to Abraham, gives him a blessing from God, and Abraham gives him a tithe, and then they go their separate ways. That's the story, basically. And it says, even Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. And it says, now the law requires the descendants of Levi who become priests to collect a tenth from the people. That is, from their fellow Israelites, even though they also are descended from Abraham. He said, here's the big thing. Abraham really owed him nothing. But because he recognized him as a priest, he gave him a tenth of what he had. As a priest of God, he made an offering essentially to God through Melchizedek. And he gave him this offering. He says, now that the law is in place, we have the Levites who are required by the law to collect a tenth from the people that they represent. Even though they're Israelites themselves, from the people they collect a tenth of everything they have. That's the way the Levites got paid. It's the way they were sustained, was a tenth of everything else that everybody else. Levites are required to collect it, and the people are required to give it. And Abraham, when he gave it, there was no obligation. He gave it freely because he was giving to God. It says, because when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was still in the body of his ancestor. I'll go one further. His ancestor wasn't even born yet. Abraham is his ancestor. So, yeah, he's not even around for a while, okay? It says, if perfection could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, and indeed the law given to the people established that priesthood, why was there still need for another priest to come, one in the order of Melchizedek, not in the order of Aaron? So here the author of Levi draws this line. And he says, if the law and the priests attached to that law could bring about perfection, there would be no need for another priest. Why would we need another one? But the truth is, the law was never given to make men righteous. It never brought us back into a righteous state with God. It was given to show how far away from God we'd really got. God never intended it to be the end thing. Because in the very system that's set up, you're always paying for the sin that you just committed or the sins that you've committed in the past. And as I've said before, at best, you're bringing yourself back up to where you were. You're still separated from God. There was nothing to bridge that gap. And so the whole thing of the law fell short of bringing us into that righteous relationship with God. God knew that. There was nothing wrong with the law that God gave. It was designed that way. It tells us, man, we really messed up. And depending on what branch of Judaism you want to follow, there's either 633 laws that you must follow or 613. If you take the easy route, you can cut 20 of them off that they found in the Old Testament. But there's still at least over 600 laws that they have in the Old Testament that you are required to fulfill if you are going to stay in any kind of a relationship with God, essentially. If you break one of those laws, you must offer a sacrifice as prescribed in the law to make atonement for that. But you're atoning for that sin, not for your life. You're atoning for what you've done. And if you could keep all 633 laws, which no one ever has, if you could keep all of those, you still are separated from God. That's who we are. So there needs to be that next step. There needs to be that next thing that can take us from being cleansed of our past sin to making us righteous where we can come back into the presence of God. That thing that we lost with Adam and Eve. Being able to walk with God directly. Being able to talk with God directly. It was taken away. And now we have one who has come who is perfect, who lived a sinless life, and who became the sacrifice for all of us, going beyond what the law and the sacrifices and the priesthood was capable of. They couldn't do it. And so it goes on here and it says, for when the priesthood is changed, the law must be changed also. He of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe has ever served at the altar, for it is clear that our Lord descended from Judah. And in regard to that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. So this author is talking to Jewish people who have accepted Christ, and he's saying to them, Jesus is now our high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And the people are going, what in the heck does that mean? And he says, here's what it means. It means that no priest that you have gone to, no sacrifice that you have made, no ritual that you have performed has ever brought you back into that right relationship. And now we have this new priest. But here's a snag. He's not a Levite. Oh, wait a minute. Law clearly states, has to be a Levite. And the author's saying, yeah, but with a new priest, a new priesthood, there's a new law. There's a new covenant, a new agreement, so to speak, with God. And so the people, if they're familiar with the Old Testament teachings, which they should have been, would know that there was another king from the tribe of Judah. His name was Uzziah. And he tried to offer sacrifice. He tried to stand in that place of a priest. And God struck him with leprosy. Whoa, wait a minute. That's pretty serious. Because he went outside of the law. And this author is explaining, now the law has been fulfilled. There's a new covenant, a new law which requires a new priest. Not the old priesthood, but a new one. Not a Levitical one, not one from the line of Aaron, but one who is appointed by God himself. So it goes on and says, and what we have said is even more clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears. One who has become a priest, not on the basis of a regulation as to his ancestry, but on the basis of the power of an indestructible life. For it is declared, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. The former regulation is set aside because it was weak and useless, for the law made nothing perfect. And a better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God. He said the old law couldn't do it. It was not perfect. But now we have a priest, and you go back to the description of Melchizedek, not because of his genealogy, not because of his mother and father, not because of anything else that has to do with him as a man. He is now a priest who was appointed by God himself, just like Melchizedek was. Melchizedek operated outside of the law. He did not receive gifts and offerings to be sacrificed to God. He received those gifts because he was a representative of God. Then the law comes into place, and everything is based upon the Israelites giving to another Israelite who's a Levite who is giving these sacrifices before God but never bringing perfection. And he says, now a new priest has come. One much like Melchizedek, appointed by God himself. One who it doesn't matter who his ancestry is. One who is the one who is representing God's new law, his new covenant. And it says, and it was not without an oath. Others became priests without any oath. The Levites became